Small boats, big lies, and the state that keeps shrugging. Let's stop pretending this is surprising. It's December, the channel is hostile, the weather is savage, and yet hundreds of people are still crossing one of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth in dinghies designed for puddles. That is not courage. That is not desperation theatre. That is a systems failure so loud it should be rattling the windows of Whitehall. And once again, Britain stands on the shore like a confused bystander asking, how did this happen? We know how, we've known for years. We just keep choosing not to act. The route that shouldn't exist. Let's be precise. This isn't people fleeing an active war zone directly into Britain. This is a multi-country journey through safe states, Spain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands. Countries with asylum systems, countries with welfare states, countries with legal frameworks that already meet international obligations, yet the final hop is always the same, a dinghy, a GPS pin, and a bet that Britain's response will be rescue first, questions later, and that bet keeps paying out. Why? Because the Channel has quietly become the world's most expensive taxi lane. Smuggling gangs don't need stealth, they don't need speed, they need predictability, and Britain has made itself predictable. This is not a border, it's a suggestion. A real border does three things: deters illegal entry, processes legitimate claims, efficiently removes those with no legal right to stay. Britain currently does none of them well. Instead, we've built a theatre of enforcement. Press conferences, high-vis jackets, phrases like robust action and cracking down. But the numbers keep climbing because the incentives haven't changed. Crossing succeeds too often. Removal happens too rarely. Processing takes too long. So the message spreads faster than any Home Office memo. If you make it to the water, Britain will pick you up. That's not compassion. That's policy malpractice. Where is France? Where is Spain? This is the part everyone tiptoes around like it's made of glass. France and Spain are not helpless bystanders. They are sovereign states. They have coast guards. They have police powers. They have a legal duty to prevent organized crime operating on their shores. Yet camps grow, boats launch in daylight. Smugglers operate with near open visibility, and Britain keeps paying for cooperation that somehow never results in prevention. At some point, diplomacy stops being polite and starts being negligent. If boats are leaving your beaches daily, you are not controlling your border. And if Britain keeps accepting the consequences without leverage, we are complicit in our own failure. The moral confusion that paralyzed policy. Here's the truth nobody wants to say clearly. You can believe in asylum and believe in borders. You can care about human life and stop illegal entry routes. You can be humane without being naive. But Britain fused morality with passivity. Any attempt to enforce borders gets framed as cruelty. Any demand for returns is treated as heresy. Any mention of deterrence gets shouted down by slogans. Meanwhile, the actual human cost rises. People drown, families disappear at sea, children are handed to smugglers like parcels. A system that encourages dangerous crossings is not compassionate. It is lethal with better PR. The quiet truth: this is a choice. This isn't about capacity, it isn't about law, it isn't even about logistics, it's about political will. Australia stopped boat arrivals, so did Greece when it decided to, so did Spain on other routes. Britain hasn't, because stopping it would require firm returns agreements, offshore processing or third country arrangements, fast, brutal clarity on failed claims, actual consequences for illegal entry, and that means upsetting people, NGOs, foreign partners, Twitter, so instead we manage decline. What happens next if nothing changes? More crossings, more winter deaths, more hotel bills, more public anger, and eventually a backlash that will be uglier than anything a competent policy would have required. Because when governments refuse to enforce rules, the public doesn't become kinder, it becomes harsher. That's not ideology, that's history. Why Britain follow the incentives? People do not risk their lives randomly. Smuggling gangs do not operate blindly. Patterns exist because incentives exist. Britain offers long processing delays, low removal rates, guaranteed rescue at sea, hotel accommodation, years-long limbo with de facto residence. This is not conjecture. This is openly discussed in smuggling networks. Britain is marketed not as easy to reach, but as hard to remove from. That distinction matters. When the probability of staying outweighs the risk of crossings increase. That is not ideology. It is basic behavioral economics. And Britain has engineered that equation deliberately, through inaction dressed up as compassion. The role of France and Spain, the silent partners. Now let's address the diplomatic elephant standing quietly in the corner, pretending to be a houseplant, France and Spain. These boats are not launching from the English coast, they are launching from European shores, often in broad daylight, often repeatedly from the same locations. This does not happen without tolerance. No state that genuinely prioritizes border enforcement allows organized criminal gangs to run maritime departures openly. If this were drugs, weapons, or cash, enforcement would be immediate. But because it is people, because the optics are delicate, enforcement becomes optional, and Britain keeps paying for cooperation that never quite results in prevention. We are funding patrols that arrive after launch, surveillance that documents departures but does not stop them, partnerships that diffuse responsibility until no one is accountable. At some point, this stops being diplomacy and starts being ritualized failure. A functioning border requires upstream enforcement. Britain does not have it, and Europe has no incentive to provide it, while the final burden lands elsewhere. The human cost of pretending this is kind. Here is the part that should make everyone uncomfortable. Every time the state signals that crossings will succeed, it increases the number of crossings. Every increase raises the death toll. Every winter crossing multiplies the risk. Children drown, families vanish, bodies are never recovered. And then the same politicians stand at podiums offering solemn statements about tragedy, as if the tragedy were meteorological rather than political. A system that rewards dangerous journeys is not compassionate. It is functionally lethal. Real compassion would eliminate the route, not normalize it. The moral blackmail that shut down policy. Britain's migration debate is held hostage by a single maneuver. Any attempt to enforce borders is framed as cruelty. Any discussion of deterrence is branded immoral. Any emphasis on returns is equated with hatred. This is not ethical reasoning. It is emotional extortion. You can believe in asylum and still enforce borders. You can protect life and still prevent illegal entry. You can be humane without being reckless. But Britain fused morality with paralysis. The result is a policy landscape where doing nothing feels virtuous, even as outcomes worsen. Other countries solved this. We chose not to. This is where excuses collapse entirely. Other countries faced identical problems. Other countries made hard decisions. Other countries reduced crossings. Australia did it. Spain did it on other routes. Greece did it when pressure mounted. They did it with offshore or third country processing, immediate returns, clear consequences for illegal entry, speed and certainty in decision making. Britain has talked about all of these, implemented none of them effectively. Why? Because real enforcement requires political spine, and spine is in short supply when outrage cycles faster than policy can be explained. The consequences of continued failure. Here is what happens if this continues. More crossings, more deaths, more public spending without resolution, more erosion of trust, and eventually a backlash that will not be nuanced, kind, or targeted. History is very clear on this point. When democratic states fail to enforce rules, the public does not become more progressive, it becomes more punitive. That is the danger zone Britain is drifting into, not because people are inherently cruel, but because order is the precondition for consent. This is not a crisis, it is a pattern. A crisis is sudden, a crisis is unexpected. A crisis overwhelms systems that were otherwise functioning. This is none of those things. Small boat crossings have been rising year after year. The routes are established, the smugglers are organized, the logistics are refined, the messaging is clear. People know the drill. Get to mainland Europe, move north, reach the French coast, wait for a calmish window, launch, call for help if needed. Britain will pick you up. That is not chaos, that is a system. An illegal one, yes, a dangerous one, absolutely, but a system nonetheless. And systems persist when they are tolerated. The smugglers are not geniuses, they are rational. There is a tendency to describe smuggling gangs as shadowy masterminds, always one step ahead of the authorities. That flatters the authorities far too much. The smugglers succeed because they are dealing with a predictable state. They know patrol patterns, they know response thresholds, they know that rescue is mandatory. They know enforcement stops at the waterline. They do not need brilliance, they need consistency, and Britain has been extremely consistent. France and Spain, the part no one wants to say loudly. Let's deal with this properly, because the silence around it is absurd. Boats do not materialize in the Channel. They leave from European shores, often from the same beaches, often repeatedly, often in daylight. This does not happen without tolerance. No state that truly wants to stop an activity allows it to operate so openly. If these were drug boats, arms shipments, or organized financial crime operations, enforcement would be immediate and aggressive. But because this issue sits in a moral grey zone, enforcement becomes negotiable. France, in particular, has mastered this balancing act. They patrol just enough to say they tried. They intervene just late enough to avoid responsibility. They allow departures while claiming cooperation. And Britain keeps paying for this arrangement, paying for patrols that observe rather than prevent, paying for technology that documents rather than disrupts, paying for partnerships that diffuse accountability. This is not cooperation, it is managed abdication. Why diplomacy has failed. British politicians speak endlessly about working with partners, but diplomacy without leverage is just polite begging. If preventing Channel crossings were treated as a non-negotiable national priority, Britain would be using trade, security cooperation, funding and legal pressure to force upstream enforcement. Instead, we issue statements, because real pressure risks tension, and tension risks headlines, and headlines risk votes, so the crossings continue. Asylum and borders are not opposites. This is the most damaging false dichotomy in modern politics. You can support asylum and enforce borders. You can protect refugees and stop illegal routes. You can be humane and firm at the same time. In fact, you must be. A system that cannot say no is not compassionate. It is chaotic. Britain does not currently control its border. France and Spain are failing to stop departures. The current system incentivizes dangerous journeys, and pretending otherwise is getting people killed. This is not about hate, it is not about race, it is not about cruelty, it is about whether Britain still believes it has the right and the responsibility to govern itself. Borders are not optional. They are not outdated. They are not immoral. They are the line between a functioning state and a well-lit waiting room. And right now, Britain is the latter. Not left, not right, just real.